What do we call a document sent by email? What part of the body propels a flying bird in the air? What do we call the joint that connects the top and bottom parts of the leg? What do we call an area in the desert where there is water and where plants grow? What do we call a public event at which things are sold to the person who offers the highest price? What do we call the series of pages showing the days, weeks and months of a particular year? Which one is the unit of capacity, centimeter or liter? What do we call a structure made for bees to live in? What do we call one of the parts of a school year? What do we call the subjects that are taught in a school or college? What is the opposite of compulsory subjects? What do we call the restaurant that serves buffets? Which type of meal is usually eaten outdoors, picnic or buffet? What do we call the container that is used for heating or boiling water? Who is trained to treat people who are ill in a hospital? What do we call a person that has won the first prize in a competition? What do we call a person that has won the first prize in a competition? What is the layer of tissue that covers our body? What is the opposite of simplify? What do we call the lizard that can change its color according to the surroundings? What do we call the sport of riding on waves while standing on a narrow board? What do we call programs that run on a computer? What is the hard substance that makes up the stems and branches of trees and shrubs? What do we call the fabric that covers the floor of an apartment? What do we call the room that is below the level of the ground? How do we describe a computer that is connected to the internet? What is the opposite of online? What do you call the curve of a road or a river? What do we call a person who is waiting for doing something? What do we usually call a person who is receiving medical treatment in a hospital? Which piece of equipment is used to control the direction of ships? Where do ships load and unload goods or find shelter from storms? Which one is a psychologist good at, surgery or therapy? What do we call the vacation taken by a couple who have just got married? What do workers wear on their heads for safety when building a house? What do we call a shape of 6 sides? Who is the person who shares the same room with you? What do we call a diagram in which an object would appear to viewers if it were cut from top to bottom? What do we call a person who studies mystery? What do we call the event in which people move through a public place to celebrate an important day or event? What is the animal that looks like a horse but with black and white stripes? How do we call the animals that are kept on farms or as pets? What is the process of water changing into a gas? Which kind of energy makes light bulbs work? What is the antonym of innocent? How do we describe a person who is not guilty of a crime? Who is in charge of a ship? What is the opposite of bitter? What do we use to rest our heads on in bed? What do we call the two metal bars that trains run on? What is a small stick made of wood or cardboard that is used for lighting a fire? What do we call the people whose job is to make clothes for individual customers? What is the small shiny white ball that forms inside the shell of oyster? What do we call the dirty water from homes and factories, which flows away through sewers? What do we call the female head of a family? What is the top surface inside the room? Which is the biggest one, the elephant, the tiger, or the cheetah? What do we call the two rows of metal or plastic teeth that you can pull together to fasten clothes or bags? What do we call the pieces of skin above and below the eye? What do we call the hair that grows on the chin and cheeks of a man's face? Which one is relating to our mind, mental or physical? What do we call the war between groups of people in the same country? Which word is relating to the moon, lunar or solar? What do we call a child whose parents are dead? Which tool with narrow pointed teeth do we use to make our hair neat? Which word do we use to describe 3 times? What do we call the person who collects secret information about another country or organization for a government? What do we usually call the container used for holding cut flowers? What do we call the glass at the front of a car? What do we call the person who has reached the age when he is legally responsible for his actions? What is the custom of being married to only one person at a time? What do we measure with units like liter? What are the units like grams and kilograms used to measure? In which style of swimming do you swim lying on your back? What do we call the periods of time when schools and colleges are closed? What does post mean in the word post-war? What do we call the meat from a cow? What do we call the amount of profits that a company pays to people who own shares in the company? What is the opposite of retail? How do we call a person who is about the same age? What do we call a set of wires covered in plastic or rubber that carries electricity? What handicap equipment is used for broken legs? Where do marine animals live? What do you call your cousin's father? What are wine glasses and spectacles made of? What do you call the country where you were born? What do we call the activity of taking out weeds from the ground? What is the opposite of emigrate? What do we call the colored liquid for writing, drawing, and printing? How do we describe things that are capable of being dissolved in a liquid? How many months does a season have? What is 1/4 of 100? Which one is renewable energy, solar power or fossil fuel? How do we describe people who have or express great love of their country? What do we call the jewelry worn around your wrist? What do we call a covering of very thin transparent material worn by a bride to hide her face? What do we call a picture painted on a wall? What do we call a man of high social rank who had a duty to fight for his king in the Middle Ages? How do we describe the action of cooking something in hot fat or oil?